Yes? Hello? Hello? Okay, facilitating change, but for what is my question. Change seems to be very good. So we have three papers. One is it's about an imagining case.
Imaginary.
Imagineering case.
But I'm presenting only the theory.
Oh, you're presenting only the theory. To embrace uncertainty. The second one is back to communicative plan and discourse, and the third is about discourse as a therapy. So let's start with the first one from Rauws, University of Groningen.
Yeah.
Yes. 15 minutes. Let's stick to 15
15 minutes. Oh, that's the challenge.
Yes.
I'll face it.
So
Okay.
then we have more time for discussion.
Thanks again for providing this platform, and I think we have a really good time together. So my talk is about embracing uncertainty without abandoning planning. And actually, it is about how planners can support cities in becoming more responsive to both foreseen and unforeseen change. And it's a spin-off of earlier sessions, as the paper is also published yesterday in a collective output with Matthias Lübken, for example, and Rijs is also there. So that's really nice to then come back here and show what the result is. Back to the paper. For those who have seen presentations of me before, know that I'm really fascinated by the question how planners can guide urban transformation by generating and influencing conditions for development. In particular for the development and redevelopment of urban districts. And this condition-based planning, that's what I refer to when talking about an adaptive approach to planning. And I prefer to use conditions over rules, since the latter gives me a feel of instructions, while conditions, I think, can have constraining, modifying, but also enabling impact. And whatever you do during this presentation, I will be very happy if you remember these three key messages I would like to share with you. So I feel that if we indeed understand cities as complex adaptive systems, then the strengthening of adaptive capacity becomes a key task of planning. And for doing so, an adaptive approach is required, which mostly focuses on generating conditions, and then followed by an attention on process and content. And I will distinguish three types of conditions, namely stimulating the quality of life, generating context-sensitive flexibility, and stimulating socially desired development. But before telling you how I arrived at these conclusions, let's start at why is this actually relevant? Why do we need adaptive planning? Very basic. I think we face a series of uncertainties in how urban developments progress, related to contextual disturbances like an economic crisis or technological innovation, related to different views and perceptions on what people think is the best way forward. Also, these are far from stable, and there are many different views we have to deal with. And of course also the fact that a small change like the creation of a creative hotspot can generate bigger effects, such as gentrification. So these are really, I believe, intrinsic part of urban development trajectories. And is this something new? No, I don't think so. I think planners are already realizing that for a long time. And also realize that it is indeed a very difficult task to operate under such conditions. And we have seen various proposals in how to understand them and deal with them. But I think two things are still very problematic, particularly with regard to urban development and redevelopment. The fact that uncertainties are often framed as risks for failures, that leads, for example, to a way of working in which we have strict project boundaries and try to exclude the context as much as possible. Well, to what extent is that actually possible? That's a good question, I think. And also that many of the instruments and the legislations are based on a stable understanding of the configuration, a stable understanding on how different functions and structures relate and work together. While we actually know that this is always, to some extent, progressing, changing, sometimes rapidly, sometimes slowly. So if we are faced with these consequences, then how can complexity be of help? That's then the key question for me. Let me be clarifying a bit on how I then see complexity with regard to the city. This is one of my favorite slides. First of all, it allows us to see cities as open systems that are sensitive to a range of contextual influences. I already mentioned the crisis, but also think of aging or technological improvement, climate change. And at the same time, they consist of many interacting but relative independent agents. Interacting without central coordination, but at the meantime also producing new patterns and structures. Hence, cities are very dynamic systems, observing all kinds of change, but also triggering new ones, progressing in both a linear and a non-linear way. Okay, if we accept this view, then what are the consequences for planners? What do we have to deal with? We have to deal with a kind of interplay between both unplanned and planned processes on multiple levels and also in different moments in time. As we already observed that these configurations are not stable, but actually continuously evolving, time has a constructive role. And that also means that those configurations that are ahead are very difficult to predict and to fully anticipate. And this really poses a central question on what planning is about. What responsibility of planning could or should be. And I take a normative stand here. If indeed we are dealing with these dynamic systems, then maybe it is the task of planners to prepare these systems to deal with these dynamics, to support the responsiveness of cities, strengthening their adaptive capacity, allowing it to keep its fit with its dynamic environment. So talking about adaptive planning, what am I talking about now? As I already said, for me it's all about conditions. Influencing and generating the conditions under which these development trajectories unfold. In contrast to building on a technical rationale, designing the optimal plan, building on a communicative rationale, trying to come to a mutual agreement on how to understand this dynamic reality. It is more about generating a kind of framework that allows a variety of possibilities to emerge over time. And therefore I think we need these conditions. So I try to make a kind of illustration of that. Instead of the prescriptive plan generating a set of conditions that allow a certain possibility space, or as I make the reference to epigenetics, it was a what kind of landscape?
Competence.
Competence landscape, indeed. I think we mean very much the same there. So I hope you're still with me, because now, of course, the question is, what kind of conditions then do we need? What I did is, of course, also diving into the literature. And actually, for this paper, I put three proposals together. One is from Stefano Moroni on democratic planning. His paper is called Complexity and the Inherent Limits of Explaining and Prediction, Urban Codes for Self-Organizing City. The work of Norit and Giovanni Portugali, Planning Rules for the Self-Planned City. and a previous paper of myself and two colleagues, Matthew and Terry, on how to increase the flexibility of development plans. Well, you could ask, of course, why these three papers? Each of them takes really an explicit complexity view, and they're all three about urban transformation. Well, what can we then learn by comparing these three papers? They have a series of common features. They all refer to a kind of abstract coordination. So it's really a kind of relational view in the sense that what kind of developments are allowed or encouraged is depending on the potential relations and conflicts of surrounding functions and structures. They're also not so much focused on shaping the device, prescribing how the future should look like, but more filtering the device. So trying to filter out some of the developments that are undesired and encouraging those that are more desired. And they also say that despite they want to open up planning frameworks and giving room to a variety of configurations, still specific targeted interventions are still part of this. So they're not completely excluding it. For example, for public facilities or providing carrying structures. Think of infrastructure. So browsing through these papers very quickly, of course, what are their key ingredients and what can we learn from them? Moroni talks about framework instruments. I think his proposal is the most generic one and also the most liberal one. He really concentrates on a set of simple rules as universal as possible and also try to prohibit certain behavior rather than direct urban development. You could think of simple rules that avoid or don't allow you to produce externalities, for example noise, that would affect neighboring plots. So he's very much concentrating, I think, on securing quality of life under a variety of potential development trajectories. Then looking at the work of Norit, she talks about urban codes. And I think her idea is very much alike. Actually, she was earlier than Moroni with it. But something you add, I think, is the attention for flexible, incremental development and trying to include the kind of context-sensitive understanding of these codes by proposing a planning judiciary, so with planning judges, making a division between urban planners that propose codes and realize certain public functions, and those deciding on whether a proposed development by market or civil society is actually acceptable within the rules, the codes, given a certain situation. So you're referring to the sense of privacy, alienation between buildings, for example. So generating context-sensitive flexibility, both in the direction of development, but also in the pace of development. And then myself, I was also struggling with this. And what I find difficult, or what I would like to add, let's put it that way, is that, generating certain possibility spaces that allow flexibility, that allow adaptivity is one thing, and it helps cities maybe to stay connected to its dynamic environment. But that doesn't mean that some futures are not preferable, more preferable than others, and also that I think we face some collective challenges in which we think we have to act upon, also proactively. Think of climate change as an example. So I was wondering how to integrate societal ideals in these codes. And it's a bit paradoxically, but in this paper I actually we propose visioning as a kind of explorative exercise, and then think back what kind of code could enhance or stimulate such kind of future development paths. So it's a paradoxical exercise in the sense that you think of, hey, what future might be desirable, but actually of trying to describe it, then deconstruct the codes that might underlie it. You can think of a code or a condition, that says if you build something, it should be energy neutral. This is also enhancing a particular development series of development paths. So, stimulating the emergence of socially desired development trajectories. And I think we saw an example yesterday also in the workshop where we proposed tax rules for stimulating multifunctional use in the nightlife of the city. Also deconstructing certain conditions. So in sum, three kind of conditions: securing the quality of life, generating context-sensitive flexibility, and stimulating the emergence of socially desired development paths. This is one thing. Okay, we have these conditions now. But also, thanks to the reviewers of the paper, of course, some reflections. I can stop anywhere. First reflection is, of course, who defines these conditions? And therefore, I think we have to think back on what are the foundations underlying these conditions. Central values, I think, central societal values, ideals, and ambitions. So that needs to be connected to communities. And the higher the level, maybe on the district, the more generic these rules can be, connected maybe to a kind of representative democracy. And the lower the scale, also connected to a kind of participatory democracy, in which these communities can add or more tailor the conditions that are set above. Okay, another reflection. Who evaluates whether this condition, whether a proposed development really fits? And I think I really align there with the proposal of Nurito Vasi, with installing a kind of planning judges that can relate what kind of conditions, what kind of development really meet the particular situation. Well, I have some other reflections, no time to share them. But these were the conclusions and these were the messages I wanted to share. And I hope that mapping these kind of conditions could be of help in bringing the debate a bit further. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you for staying in time. Mrs. Borghi.
Okay, first of all, thank you for a very, very clear presentation. And I am very much connected to the paper. I wanted to ask two main things. One, when you speak about social ideal values, which is like kind of putting the way to extract the general direction, I think there can be a fundamental difference between performing this in a society which is mostly homogeneous and doing this in a society which has a flabbergasting diversity, and we are more or less going there. So it probably needs to be addressed because you will have cultures which, as you saw, for example, now in the Palestinian village example, or the Chinese presentation that we saw, we will have culture which have very different value, which are based on different social norms, which require different kind of space. So how exactly this discussion will take place is something that if we want it in the planning, we should start to work on it right now. And I don't really have an answer, I'm just opening the question mark. Yeah. The second thing is that though you speak about conditions, which I think is a very interesting way to look at the adaptability, it's very difficult to know what will be the result. And then the one thing that I'm really missing is monitoring. How do we monitor on the long range that these conditions, with this judge, with this actor, will provide a space that reflects in any fashion the social target. And this also, it's a very complex, how do you monitor it? How do you know after 10 years, 20 years, who is doing it. That's it.
System. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. With regard to your first questions about this foundation of maybe societal ideas or ideals or values, I know it sounds a bit naive also to understand to consider, well, there is something like that which is robust enough to base these conditions on. But on the other hand, where to start? What's the alternative to start with?
I don't think it's naive. I really think it's critical. I'm simply saying I think it's really not trivial because we will be confronting big gap. This is what I'm saying. So we need to have a plan for it. We need to have
Yeah, but I think at the same time that the way, at least, let's refer to the planning system in the Netherlands, of course, this also emerged out of certain societal values and wishes, and some stay longer than we wanted, and others are more flexible and more quicker adapted. So indeed, I think it's a matter of how to bring in these societal ideals and values. And I think depending on the scale, there are different ways and forms to organize this, and also to keep track on what is the leading discourse. That maybe it's is that in line with what you're thinking about?
I saw many hands, but is it has to do with this subject or not? Give it away, but otherwise I first go to the second question.
No, let's go to the side.
Because I get the feeling that somehow you're asking where to start. So, to my view, in a little bit, like having vision of the conditions is somehow a little bit, first of all, maybe naive, and second of all, maybe too comprehensive. And maybe it is better to start with rules. Small rules regarding relations between elements in various aspects. Not to shade, to respect others' accessibility ability and to I don't know, to relate to environmental resources and things like that. And like the vision is the outcome of all of this, but it is made of small slices, of small principles that we can all agree on.
Okay, someone to add on this? Yes?
You say the vision is the outcome of this. I want to challenge that completely. The vision is the idea you have today of what the better outcome looks like. It's not a target. If you want a target, get Lego bricks and build a castle as it's printed in the manual. You're not doing that kind of stuff. When people voice a vision, it's what they have in mind as a solution with what they know today. But it's not the end thing. So if you ask how are we going to monitor if we're going the right way, it's related to that. I mean, if your vision is not your end target, but is a wish that is actually an explanation of what's valuable right now and which you would like to see kept in place in a different structure, in a different way.
But that's also
that's a continuous. That means that these visioning exercises are a continuous exercise. So the evaluation will be the restatement of this visioning exercises all over, and not thinking of it in terms of some kind of targets.
You're now driving towards the monetary thing. We were still busy with how to begin, but no.
But it's how I see the function of visioning in this process. And it's not claiming that indeed it is an end product. It's a starting point for identifying.
Well, if you ask where to begin, that's the wrong question. It's already begun, and it's just doing something that has already been done before and making it more explicit. I mean,
Okay.
Jenny?
I want to talk about the next question.
Then Jenny. You can ask your next question.
Okay, can I ask this? It's pretty much the same with the person. I was wondering, why you are missing the kind of the discourse from ecosystem planning regarding adaptive management, because in ecosystem planning, the whole thinking of ecosystems and steering them is based on resilience theory, which, as Barbara was talking about yesterday, is explicitly a theory of adaptive systems. And because I just happen to be working with the same issues myself, so I kind of found my sources from there. And I think they explicitly contemplate the issue of monitoring, evaluating and correcting the. It comes straight from the systems dynamics, right? Kind of like correct and monitor constantly.
Yeah.
So they have, in a way, built in the idea of planning through trial and error.
Yeah.
So you implicitly talked about it when you said that we are afraid to fail, but we shouldn't be afraid to fail. We should be trialing, and every now and then fail. And if we fail, we correct, we do something else.
Yeah.
And it's not necessarily a big frame in which you can do anything. It can be very targeted, like what Nurit said, like small rules, just impacting a couple of actors, and then see how it goes.
Okay. I have the feeling that I gave the impression that we start from a white paper with nothing on it, and that's absolutely not how I would see this. And I concentrated on what kind of conditions you could distinguish. But I completely agree that this is, of course, embedded in a process of learning, monitoring, adjusting, recoding, you could call it as well. And it's also a bit what I heard in the previous stories, trying to connect yesterday evening, making the presentation, trying to connect the different ways we identified so far. And these are more formal ways of doing it, and there are more informal ways of doing it, up to the level what Sharon was talking about, simply changing or altering these conditions by walking somewhere, by acting yourself. So I hope that's a bit clarifying. But I do think government or public authorities have a key role in at least securing the collection of this data, sharing it also, make it publicly available. So that also all these actors that are involved in working with these conditions can see how they play out, or at least start to analyze that.
Luc, kan I? Luc? Ik geloof dat het zwaaien, maar je...
Yes.
Can I or yeah?
Yeah, you can.
Okay.
Yes,
sorry,
you can.
sorry, Wart, for maybe attacking you, but
No, it's
we've been having some discussions about conditions, and all the time I had the feeling that I don't quite understand what you mean by conditions. So I'm really happy with your presentation, because now I'm like, that's what he's been talking. Now I understand, because I have the feeling that you talk about conditions that are somehow not well, that are part of the system, that are evolving, that are changing, that are relational, that are and therefore that are within, or that are imminent to what we do or what happens in space. And therefore I'm wondering whether conditions is actually the right word. Because conditions, to me, like the word itself, it's something that's around me, that's influencing me, but it's not part of me. It's something external. And I had the feeling that some of this discussion is also, like some of the questions that you just had are sort of like an interpretation of condition as something that is on a white paper, that is something that is like overarching, like, you know, something that is that we as individuals can hardly influence. And some of the comments are, for instance, related to Nurit, small rules, small interferences, and I'm just wondering, is condition the right word for the things that you are talking and aiming to address?
Well, I think first of all, these conditions are everywhere, and also currently here in this room. But also on a macro level. And these can be cultural changes, it can be the economic climate in which you operate, etc., etc. But of course, then the key question is, talking from a planner's perspective, what kind of conditions can we have a substantial influence at? Or can we actually generate ourselves? And that's what this talk is about. So I completely agree that there's a wider range of factors that condition what our behavior and the opportunities we have to act. What would be an alternative?
I don't know. Well,
Okay.
yesterday in the workshop we talked about conditions, but we also talked about attractors.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I'm just talking here intuitively, so I don't know from a theoretical point, but somehow attractors, to me, brings in an association that is, an attractor is part of who I am, and it attracts me to a certain preferable state, but it does so with other people and other actors and factors as well.
Yeah.
So it's part of me, whereas conditions, it's something that I cannot touch or influence. And it's just a feeling that I have with the words, but
Okay.
But perhaps
that keeps confusing.
But there was still one whole way full time.
And maybe I can just add something to that, in that when we're talking about conditions, I wonder if we're talking about complexity, whether it's worthwhile speaking of it in terms of the sort of overall phase space of possibilities, which is about your degrees of freedom within which to operate. And then if you are really about creating adaptive capacity, what you want to be doing is you want to be strengthening the degrees of freedom within which to explore this phase space, so that you're not locked into only one attractor area that maybe is being imposed by particular actors, but you actually have the capacity to explore multiple attractors within phase space. And if we think about it in those terms, then we shouldn't be visioning to achieve one idea about where to go, because that implies that there is one preferred attractor, but rather we should be trying to think about how do you create these affordances for multiple attractors to be explored, because some niches may only hold 2 or 3 people, but that's okay, right? So, originally I was going to ask a question about the role of actual spatial morphological conditions in creating these affordances, which is sort of more where my research has been going. And again, I sort of feel like that's in your framework. I feel like, well, what's the adaptive capacity of space itself that I sort of wish was in some way included? Because I always feel as planners we're talking about the planning process, but somehow the actual adaptive capacity of space itself, or the thing we are planning, is somehow a little off to the side sometimes in the conversations.
Yeah.
Okay, but small answer? No?
Yeah, I focus very much indeed on the institutional landscape, and it's a valid point, I think. So thank you so much.
Okay, but we have to proceed. So keep your questions for lunch.
Let's discuss further.
Yeah. Also the attractor thing might be a way to phrase the third type of condition.
That's what I'm thinking.
Yeah. Triggering preferred routes.
Yeah.
Yes? Can we proceed?
So it's Mina?
Sorry?
It's Mina?
Yes? Okay. Oh,
That would be great. I can also just come over.
Oh, this one. So